The key food issues were needed production, food preservation, and efficient delivery. It was bad roads, transportation woes, the fortunes of war, food riots, incompetence, and corruption. Add the horrors of slavery, unsanitary conditions, and disease, plus the brutality to horses and mules. Slavery was the cause of secession and indirectly the war. They were consistently fed and housed poorly. With little need for growing cotton, slaves were used in the war effort as teamsters, cooks, and workers. Better off soldiers brought slaves as servants. The Confederacy seldom allowed them to fight. The Union had a substantial number of black troops, perhaps 200,000. Wagons with supplies, cavalry, and artillery all needed horses and mules. The livestock needed large amounts of food and veterinary care. The standard ration was 14 pounds of hay and 12 of grain, plus 10 gallons of water. The Army of the Potomac had 30,000 horses. That's 780,000 pounds of food a day. They were in the line of fire and died by the thousands from war wounds, starvation, and exhaustion. In extreme cases, they were killed for food. A common estimate was 2 million deaths, although it could have been much higher. Union General William Tecumseh Sherman had a successful Atlanta campaign in mid-1864. Sherman started his march to the sea as a scorched earth campaign to destroy infrastructure while foraging supplies for his 62,000 troops. That meant no need for open supply lines, but primarily the destruction of food for the South. He based his route on census data from 1860. Sherman reached Savannah in December. Sherman's telegram to Lincoln: "I beg to present you as a Christmas present the city of Savannah." The results were devastating to the Confederacy, with the loss of infrastructure, troops, equipment, food, and livestock. Thousands of horses, mules, cattle, plus millions of pounds of corn and fodder. This was called total war by military experts. Northern troops invading the southern states had additional problems of logistics and disease. The South was hotter, with potential for malaria and other diseases not common in the North. The poor transportation in the South meant moving troops, food, and ammunition also had difficulties. Pneumonia, typhoid, dysentery, cholera, measles, smallpox, and mumps killed thousands. Sanitation was a leading cause, with little help from the medical profession. Given chaotic battlefield conditions, Congress passed legislation approving the U.S. Sanitary Commission in mid-1861. Although with no budget, the primary concern was sanitary conditions and care for the injured, then expanded to hospital inspections, transporting the sick, providing medical supplies and food. This was paid for by fundraising schemes, especially sanitary fairs. The most successful was the Great Central Fair in Philadelphia in 1864. The building was constructed exclusively for the fair. With over 100,000 people attending, The fair raised $1.1 million. They sold tickets to get in, stamps, food, and souvenirs. Many women played useful roles, often as nurses and other caregivers, some as writers, occasionally as soldiers. Mary Ann Bickerdike volunteered to deliver donated supplies to troops and was sworn in as a sanitary commission agent. Mary Ann stayed to nurse the injured, called Mother Bickerdike by the troops. She continued as a sanitary commission agent, helping build hospitals and aid the wounded through 19 battles, including Sherman's March to the Sea. Her aid continued for the rest of her life. Clara Barton was a schoolteacher, then a patent clerk in Washington. When injured people arrived during the Civil War, she worked as a volunteer nurse and provided them with clothing and supplies. She received support from the Ladies' Aid Society to provide supplies to the front. She became the lady in charge, according to General Butler, and the Florence Nightingale of America. Barton became a major force in establishing the American Red Cross. Her last field operation was after the Galveston hurricane in 1900, when she was almost 80. Born a slave in Maryland, Tubman was hit on the head and suffered a traumatic head wound that caused her visions, which she attributed to God. She escaped, then returned on 13 missions as a conductor of the Underground Railroad, freeing some 70 other slaves. Harriet worked for the Union during the Civil War as a cook and nurse, then a scout and spy. She guided a raid that rescued 700 slaves, the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. His troops had not eaten for a couple of days, so as part of the surrender, Lee requested 25,000 rations for his men. Grant generously complied. The war was effectively over. As part of the war effort, Northern entrepreneurs created canning operations of all kinds. Borden produced condensed milk. There was Van Camp's pork and beans, and Underwood's deviled ham. More on factory foods next time on Food History and Mystery.